negotiations. If Alberta gets what it wants, then we have recreated Alberta within Confederation. If Alberta doesn't get what it wants, then Alberta designs itself as a new sovereign nation. It's really that simple, but here's the way it would work. So you elect the next government, and that government takes control of that which it can within the Constitution. And those things are policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. And provincial tax collection, of course, sets the stage for federal tax collection. Now, once as you're taking control of those things, which can be done within 2 years of the 2023 May election, you're also demonstrating to the public the intransigence of the federal government in order to permit Alberta to collect federal taxes, to get out from under the restrictions of the Canada Health Act, in order to come up with much better and more creative solutions to healthcare. And I digress for a second. Many of you don't know, but you may know that the healthcare system in this province functions in the lowest quartile of quality and is in the highest quartile of cost. But in addition to that, we can end equalization or negotiate ending equalization and other egregious taxes like the carbon tax. And during that 2-year period where you've taken control of the things that you can within the Constitution, you are also educating the public as to the intransigence to absolutely fix Alberta's circumstances within Confederation, in which case that government can then, at roughly 18 months to 2 years, can say to the public, we need a mandate to negotiate with Ottawa from a position of strength, in which case it then conducts a referendum on independence. And when successful, then Alberta can go to Ottawa, negotiate for 6 to 12 months for the deal that it wants. And if it doesn't get it, Alberta can become a new nation untethered to Canada. And that could be the outcome by as soon as 2026, well in advance of the 2030 ending of our hydrocarbon industry in this province. And what the Alberta Prosperity Project is all about is growing the membership to 500,000, 1 million or more people, in which case, as Ralph Klein used to muse about government, is find a parade and get in front of it. So we are creating that movement, that parade, if you will, that any government or any party that wants to form government or any government that's in power will want the support of the folks who are members of the Alberta Prosperity Project. And so really, in a very real way, we're growing the membership rapidly with over 1/3 members, several thousand, sorry, let me rephrase that, over 1/3 of social media followers and several thousand members. And we have a ways to go, but we have plans to do that, and they're unfolding incredibly rapidly. We've got a great team with over 1,000 volunteers and some extremely talented people that are working on your behalf to save your individual freedoms and rights and prosperity and to save this amazing province. And that's all I'm going to say for now. And I'm sure this has generated a few questions, and I look forward to answering them at the anointed time. Thank you very much for your attention.
That's great, Dennis. Thank you so much. I think if you don't mind just staying on just for one quick question here, because I know there's some people that are out there saying something along the lines of, well, you guys must not like Canada. And I have to say for myself, I love Canada. I love the land. I love Canadians. I love the people. What I think we're really getting screwed on, per se, is the Canadian government. And I think that's the biggest thing. So, Dennis, I'm just going to ask you, what do you say to these naysayers that are basically saying you're a separatist and making it sound like it's a really bad thing? What would you say to them?
Well, I think it's a fair question, but it's a question that lacks understanding of what we are really all about. Yeah. I am a Canadian, and it is our feeling, and this goes back many, many decades, right to the national energy policy, or even the agricultural wars prior to that, that Alberta does not get a fair deal within Confederation. And Alberta has not been in a position in order to negotiate a better deal within Confederation. And there is no mechanism for Alberta to achieve that objective. And why do we know that? Because successive provincial governments have tried. And a deaf ear is always what Alberta gets from the federal government. Even the issue of ending equalization. Mr. Kenney was wise in this context. The equalization referendum that occurred in the province was primarily virtue signaling, because he knew he was not going to be able to go to Ottawa and negotiate the end of equalization, because he had no leverage to do it. But, you know, with respect to the leverage of a referendum on independence, it does not mean that Alberta leaves Canada. It means that Alberta now, for the first time in its 116 years, can negotiate with Ottawa and the other provinces from a position of strength. For those people who would say that we are a separatist organization, I would say to those people, we are independence-minded folks. We like less regulation and less governance. We want to be able to make our own way in life and purchase the goods and services that we want without the federal government purchasing them for us. And I think a very important point to understand is that when private enterprise provides to the public a service or a product at $1, for the government, the federal government, to provide that same service or product, it costs the consumer $3. So the dysfunctional circumstances of federal bureaucracy and the spinning of Alberta money within that bureaucracy and to virtue signaling causes that don't align with Alberta values is very compelling for Alberta to want to chart a new path forward. And that new path forward can be within Confederation or without Confederation, i.e. untethered to Canada. And I can assure those people who talk and accuse us of being in favor of independence or separation, let me assure you that there are many people in other regions of this country who want more freedom, more individual freedoms and rights, and more prosperity and less governance. And they feel exactly the way that we do. It's just that we have mapped out a process by which we can actually achieve the objective. And it's an example for other provinces who want more autonomy within Canada or who want out as well. And why we know this is true is because we've been invited to speak in Saskatchewan in 3 different locations, and we've already had one. We have communication from people and everywhere, from just about every province in the country, supporting exactly what we are talking about. And so at the end of the day, Alberta could lead the rest of the country and virtually save Canada from federal governance, overreach, overregulation, and overtaxation to the benefit of all of the other provinces in this country. So it's really incorrect to assume that Alberta only seeks independence untethered to Canada. What APP is advocating for is to give the next government negotiating power for the first time in 116 years. And the only way you can get it is through a referendum on independence. I can't make it any clearer than that. But for those people who are socialists and love the idea of big government and social programs, there are other regions in the world in which you can live.
Very good. And just to follow up on that, Alberta is a great place to be starting this, because we could be self-sufficient with everything. You name it, we can probably do it here in Alberta. And so much that, like you said, places in Saskatchewan, they're already looking at doing a Saskatchewan prosperity project, or maybe even a Manitoba prosperity project. So I think we're definitely leaders, and being in Alberta, I'm quite proud to be even associated with this, and hopefully we can continue this further and actually gain independence like what we want. So thank you so much for your time, Dennis. Please don't go away. I'm sure we'll have some questions for you at the end. And so right now we're going to be talking about our next guest, and he's a member of the Carry the Kettle Band in Sinta-Luda, Saskatchewan, and was raised in Edmonton, Alberta. He's the recipient of many scholarships, including awarded the Government of Canada Legal Studies for Aboriginal People Scholarship. He attended the University of Alberta, earning degrees with distinction in arts, English literature, and law in 1992. In 2009, he was appointed Queen's Counsel, and in the time was the youngest lawyer in Alberta to receive the title Learned in the Law. He owns his own law practice with firms of 12 lawyers in Coal Lake, Edmonton, and Calgary, known as Gray Walk Spencer LLP, and is the senior managing partner and head of its civil litigation section. He has been recognized with multiple awards for serving his community and advocating for the well-being of Indigenous peoples of Alberta, as well as all Albertans. Since 2020, he has acted as lead counsel in several high-profile constitutional cases, including James Coates and Grace Life Church, Timothy Stevens and his church in Calgary, the vaccine mandate cases involving CN, CP, AHS, the U of A, Mount Royal University, as well as others. And you might also recognize his name as one who had Dina Hinshaw on the hot seat over the last few months. A proud Albertan who is tirelessly advocating for restoration and rehabilitation of the civil liberties guaranteed to all of us by God and the rule of law in that order, as enshrined under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Leighton Gray.
Good evening. Thanks very much for that introduction, Carrie. I'm somewhat new to APP, but not new to the idea of a sovereign and free and prosperous Alberta. And prosperity and how it could be achieved in Alberta is sort of going to be the focus of my brief comments this evening. I'm a fan of aphorisms, quotations, and also political cartoons. And I found one today just to tie into what Dr. Modry was saying that sort of explains pretty well the situation in Canada right now. So if you imagine the picture of a hockey stick, the blade of the stick represents the business end of the stick. So that's Ontario and especially Quebec. The short end of the stick is represented by Atlantic Canada. So think of that as the handle. And of course, that only leaves for Alberta, the shaft. And that's sort of what Canada looks like. That's what Confederation Explained looks like graphically in the shape of a hockey stick. And this is a really, really serious problem. And it's a serious problem today. It's been a serious problem for generations, and it's going to continue to be, as Dr. Modry puts it, an existential problem. That is, people say, oh, well, you know, you people are separatists and you don't love Canada. Actually, as Dr. Modry puts it, we're trying to save the part of Canada that we have grown and that we've developed and that we love, the most important part to us, and that's our beloved Alberta. And we are in an existential situation. It's not as though we can ride merrily along. We are heading towards a waterfall. The situation in Canada is unsustainable from a prosperity point of view. And this is really what I want to talk about, is this concept of prosperity. So I want to just talk about this word prosperity, because I think it's a very important word. It's deliberately chosen. When I talked to Dr. Modry about this, it's very clear that this concept of prosperity is key to the APP. It's a big part of it's maybe the biggest P in the APP. So what is prosperity? Well, we know what it isn't. Winston Churchill described what prosperity isn't when he said, "We contend that for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handle." And I would contend that that person was an Albertan living in Canada. The former emperor of Rome, Marcus Tullius Cicero, once said that in prosperity, let us most carefully avoid pride, disdain, and arrogance. Well, pride, disdain, and arrogance. Isn't that our prime minister? Let's talk, though, about what prosperity means in a broader sense. Prosperity is not just having things, it's the consciousness that attracts the things. Prosperity is a way of living and thinking, and not just having money or things. Poverty is a way of living and thinking, and not just a lack of money or things. And then one by Robert Frost is a very famous poem that I think maybe many of the viewers and listeners have heard before or read, that reads, "Two roads diverge in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." And so this sort of speaks to the people who say, well, you know, you don't love Canada, let's just keep going. Well, we're at this divergence in the wood, and we have to choose a different road. That road, and this is the position of the APP, that road can make all the difference. We don't know what that road, where that road is going to lead us precisely, but we do have a plan, and there is a vision. And you know, if you really think about it, when you have a clear vision and you think about it clearly, you plan carefully, and you act that out, and you persevere, your chances of achieving that vision are pretty good. And when you consider, you know, the quality of the leadership that's here within the APP, I think that there's an excellent opportunity for Alberta, but the time is now. This election that's upcoming, 2023, is going to be very, very key for the future of our province, and so the time is now. We have to start thinking about prosperity and doing these things right now and get boots on the ground. So what does prosperity mean? Well, here's a few synonyms. It means accomplishment. It means benefit. It means boom. What says Alberta more than boom? Expansion, growth, interest, riches, success, wealth, well-being, abundance, advantage. Remember the Alberta advantage? All these things, fortune, increase, opulence, plenteousness. This word prosperity, it's much broader than just things. It's much broader than just money. And I equate it with beauty. And I'm referring here to a famous British philosopher, British thinker. His name's Dr. Roger Scruton. He died a few years ago, but he left behind a legacy of just beautiful books, wonderful books. And he talked about conservatism. He talks about conservative in the context of a conservative conserves beauty. And beauty and prosperity, for me, are synonyms here. What we're talking about here in terms of prosperity is preserving all the great things about our province, all the things that we love about Canada, all of our values, putting God back at the head of the state, living in a society where we're free, where we can do the things that we want to do, where we can spend time with our family and friends, we can grow our businesses, we can have rights, a Bill of Rights that I'm working on right now, actually, and I have been working on feverishly this week, that are meaningful, that a government cannot infringe upon and take away like so much candy at Halloween. That's the beauty. That's the beauty of prosperity, and that's what's worth preserving and maintaining and carrying forward. That's the part of ourselves and our culture and our province that we want to carry on to our children and our grandchildren for generations and generations. And so, as I said, there's a very specific vision of what this means, about what prosperity means. And I invite all the listeners who have not yet done so to visit the APP website. And there's a 10-point vision here. I'm just going to go through a few of these points because I think that they illustrate what I'm saying here even better than I can on my own. The first one is Alberta becomes the most free and prosperous nation in the world to live, work, raise a family, or start a business. My friend Tanner is going to come on. He's going to talk more particularly about the economics of that. But that sounds pretty good as a first principle. Secondly, First Nations participate as founding partners. Well, today is National Indigenous Day. And this is a very important concept, because really you can encapsulate and describe the two best ideas that Canada has had for dealing with Indigenous peoples by looking at what Justin Trudeau is doing, what he did recently when he flew into Calgary and stayed at the Palace under cover of night to write a $1.3 billion check, which probably isn't going to help anybody on Siksika First Nation, because it's going to perpetuate a system of dependency that has existed in this country for centuries. So that's one of their best ideas. The other best idea they had was the other Trudeau, who in 1969 commissioned a white paper that was to abolish all of the treaties and really not even acknowledge that First Nations peoples have any special status within Canada. And really, those are the two best ideas they've had, and both of them are lousy. So what the APP is talking about is saying, let's have First Nations people with a seat at the table as partners, as people who will sit down at the table and help us fashion a new nation that has respect and dignity for First Nations peoples, which let's face it, which we have never enjoyed in this country. It's never going to happen because it's very clear that the Liberals in particular, and this government, wants to perpetuate this system of dependency, which has caused generational harm and damage to First Nations peoples. No Albertan is left behind. There's no need for political left or right. Workers' rights are protected, and business is allowed to thrive. Social programs are compassionate and effective. Healthcare and education are of the highest quality. Pensions and old age security are secured and markedly enhanced. Every Albertan and their family enjoys an enhanced quality of life and standard of living. And Alberta becomes the lowest taxed and highest GDP per capita nation in the world. That's a beautiful vision, and it's possible, and we can do it. We have the people, we have the knowledge, we have the expertise, and most of all, we have the energy to do it. And it just takes boots on the ground. We have to decide to do it. Each one of us commit to this vision and do everything we can to make it happen. And in the fullness of time, with God's grace, it will happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Leighton. Before you disappear, can you comment on any of the stuff that you're working on the Bill of Rights?
Certainly. I've been asked to, first of all, I'm very honored to have been asked to be involved with this.
Absolutely.
Dr. Modry has asked me to work with Jeffrey Raff, who's formerly is the board member for legal matters, constitutional matters for the APP, and I've been assisting them. And our discussions have been to look at ways of fashioning a new Bill of Rights and a new constitution that will really blend perhaps the best aspects of the Canadian and the US and the Swiss constitutions. And so what I've been working on this week is I've been looking at documents from those three different jurisdictions to sort of pick out the best parts, and then also develop ideas that are specific to Alberta. Right now, I've started with the Bill of Rights because I really see that as I see the new Alberta to the sort of legal key to it, or the foundation to it, is the primacy, first of all, the supremacy of God, but within that, the freedom of the individual. Because I happen to believe that God made us to be free, and that our laws need to speak that out and to speak that into action. And so I'm starting from the point of view of looking at a Bill of Rights and then working backwards from there to set out certain government powers. And so what I've done is already I fashioned about 13 different rights, essential rights, all of which are focused on limiting and restricting the power of government overreach. Because as Dr. Modry so aptly put a few moments ago, That's what we're dealing with in Canada. We're seeing the disintegration, the destruction of our tradition of freedom and rights. And so that's the process that I'm following. So I'm going to be collaborating with Jeffrey Rath and working with Dr. Modry and the other members of the board to fashion a Bill of Rights and a constitution that, as I said, is going to put God at the head of the state, preserve the rule of law, and protect the individual and sacrosanct human rights of every single Albertan.
That's awesome, because I know there's tons of people that are questioning, how does APP, how can we actually be a province and be a country and deal with currency and issues of policing, and to me, it all starts with having a Bill of Rights and a Charter of Rights and Freedoms specific to Alberta. So I thank you so much for being able to do this and giving your time, I guess, in terms of that as well too. So,
One final note I'll say to people
Yes.
who say it cannot be done. It's
Yeah.
been done.
Yeah.
This was done about 246 years ago
there you go.
in the United States, when they got together the 13 original colonies, and they were dealing with a much more risky situation than we are right now, because they were facing a military revolutionary war to gain their freedom. Whereas the APP, we have, as Dr. Modry points out, we have all the tools to do this peacefully.
Yeah, that's right. I believe with the U.S., it was also they basically went to war, fight for their independence because of a 2% taxation without representation. And how much are we being taxed right now? It's ridiculous, right?
Well, we just had Tax Amnesty Day, just the other day, so it's not a good situation.
No, it keeps moving back and back into the calendar year. So thank you so much, Leighton, and
thank you.
And please stick on, and I'm sure we'll have some questions for you later. Thank you.
Thanks.
And so next up, our next presenter is from Lloydminster, Alberta. He's a brilliant industrial organization economist and published author. He is a speaker and commentator on political and ethical issues and has studied under some of Canada's foremost economists. With his keen interest, wit, and bright mind, he offers so much perspective to the Alberta Prosperity Project, and he's here to demonstrate the many merits and benefits of a free and prosperous Alberta. He is co-hosting weekly podcasts in his effort to spread the APP message from a free and prosperous Alberta far and wide. And from what we have seen, these podcasts have reached over 10,000 views already. He is our acting VP of Economics, as well as co-leader of our youth chapter. He cares deeply about the state that Alberta finds itself in and about how intrusively our governments are meddling in our economy in order to facilitate our ruin. Here with an economic forecast for the independent nation of Alberta, Mr. Tanner Nide.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie, and thank you all for being here this evening. It's a lovely day outside, and so to see all of this dedication to independence, it brings a lot of encouragement to all of our hearts. But for my brief address this evening, I've been asked to craft a presentation actually for the young adults in our crowd, and I am very happy to do so, and so I very happily agreed, and I'll do my best. Normally, it's about the economics, and there are economics in this talk for sure, but this one is predominantly structured for those younger and younger adults and youth in the crowd. Everyone understands that the challenges of life are inexhaustible. The challenges for any, whether the toddler who has temporarily lost his toy, or the teenager who's failed his learner's exam, or the university student who was graded unfairly, as I think I so often was, or the middle-aged man, trying to navigate inflation, or the senior who's struggling with mobility or decreased mobility or inflation himself, et cetera, et cetera. All of these challenges are clear and present, and they afflict us in our everyday activities. Now, it's perhaps one of the greatest challenges of life to minimize the prevalence and the frequency of all the other challenges. It's one of the great goals of our existence. And it's an indisputable fact, and I think Leighton has detailed this so eloquently, contrary to what our university professors often say, that our Western society with a Judeo-Christian framework is unparalleled in its ability to do so, to minimize those challenges and those difficulties that life has a tendency to throw at us. We live a more comfortable life than not just our neighbors in other continents, but than all our ancestors throughout the whole of history, is what I mean to say. But we, those of us who
The
are a
situation
little
in
younger,
Canada is
primarily have been taught
unsustainable.
and then trained in an education system the whole operated by the government, dictated by the government, supervised by the government. And so it's therefore no surprise that a sentiment, which is false, of the necessity of big, all-powerful, omnicompetent government is prevalent among our peers, among the youth, and among university students and high school students, et cetera, et cetera. We have been told and promised from our youth scaffolding into our university courses in university and in public education that we need big government and that we are to harbor, at the very least, an empathy for socialism or pseudo-socialism or semi-socialist policies, and the challenges of life can be defeated with our friends and rulers in this big, overweight, bloated bureaucracy that we now are trying to navigate. That's been what we've been told our whole lives, is that if only you look to government, there you will find your salvation. But now, of course, we're discovering that that's a lie. And it's a serious lie from the point of view that we're exposed to an economy that's inflated, crashing, and false. It's been this economy that has disregarded reality, all because of the government. You see, we're supposed to trust them, or at least we were told we were supposed to trust them, and now they've facilitated this mounting economic crisis. Our student debt is mounting with no summit in sight. Debts themselves are suffocating, not only us as a younger generation, but almost everyone in the country. And of course, if we want to try and get ahead in life, it seems to be impossible to do so. Inflation, of course, is crushing our ability, one, to pay rent on our own, let alone purchase a house, two, to pay the debts that are, as I mentioned, suffocating just about everyone in the country, and three, because of inflation and the cost of living and the scarcity of jobs that pay as inflation continues to rise, it's almost impossible to save some money to be used later, or to save it for other goods and services, or for a child, or for a house, and so on and so on. So the difficulty that we as a younger generation face is that we have not acquired the sufficient capital needed to weather this ominous economic storm that has announced to us its presence, because we have not lived long enough to save any meaningful amounts of money to do so. And that isn't the younger or the youth's fault. It's a simple fact of reality of being younger than, say, a man who's middle-aged. Now, it might be that our professors and classmates talk about the benefits of socialism and socialistic policy. We're looking forward, they say, to a state of humanity and society that is far better than the uneducated and unenlightened Canadian or Albertan public has ever attained. And those who are in university, specifically in the liberal arts, will know exactly what I'm talking about and what sort of rhetoric is spewed forth in those classes that push this pseudo-socialist or this semi-socialist or this full socialist policy for as many students as possible to hear. But an ideology is only that. It's an ideology, and it can either conform to or reject the reality that we interact with in the world at large. So we might have heard in a class or hear about the grandiose promises of equality in a socialist system. But as we progress towards more socialism and a socialist government and a socialist society, we find it's true that everyone is becoming more equal. But it's an equality of poverty and an equality of fear. The socialist intellectual that we were taught by might preach about how his ideology is loving and kind and tolerant, and yet vast multitudes in Canada were discriminated against and hated by their government because they refused to capitulate and be inoculated with something that they didn't want to be inoculated with. And it might be that the university socialist proclaims that capitalism is evil and is the cause of our problems, or that the free market is evil and that the free market is the cause of our problems. But the reality is that as higher taxes are imposed and more regulation is introduced, the lights of downtown Calgary are going out. And that downtown and Edmonton's downtown is turning dark as the shadow of the socialist belief descends across the country and the province and the cities in Alberta. And while we might be able to tolerate the forecast for more socialism today, soon the storm will rage and it will roar. And those who have yet to pay off their mortgages or student debt or have secure jobs will struggle to find shelter when the storm or where the storm hits and it's most aggressive. Two options therefore lie before us. On the one hand, we can do nothing and allow ourselves to be conquered by an all-consuming fire that will devour our funds and opportunity to see ourselves flourish. Or we can do something today to protect our rights and freedoms and prosperity. So it's for that reason that I'm a proponent of the Alberta Prosperity Project and am part of the Alberta Prosperity Project. In it, I do not recognize ideology or theoretical ideals that might or might not work. In it, I instead recognize solutions that, once adopted, would build a bastion around Alberta and protect us and repel socialism from injecting itself and infiltrating itself into our province. For example, the most clear and present solution that we're proposing with regards to this, and I think for the youth as well, is that Alberta cut its tax rate as an independent nation to a flat 10%. The advantages of this are numerous and they are visible. I look at how much I'm forced to pay, as you do, at the end of each month or during tax periods, and it's a difficult thing to swallow. And for what? We disproportionately contribute to the CPP by $3 billion every year. We pay a heavy cost in equalization, just in equalization, of another $3 billion every year. All in, as Dr. Modry has mentioned, all in total, sending some $60 billion to Ottawa every year. And who knows how much we get back? It seems to vary. And of course, our services are insufficient. We look at what we pay for healthcare versus the care that we actually receive, and we compare it to other nations, and we discover that we're not exactly getting the best deal. It's actually one of the worst deals. Of course, our roads and so on are a mess, and our government now, if you can believe it, and perhaps Chris might speak about this, is going to put warning labels on beef, along with a lot of other regulation and restrictions that will seriously hamper and endanger our beef industry in Alberta as we know it. But not only so, when you look in Ontario and see that the largest cricket facility in the world has just been constructed to process, I believe it's 9,000 tons of crickets. It's either 3 or 9, I can't quite remember, every year. And you see that one is also being constructed in Balzac. It makes you seriously wonder precisely what is happening in this country. And it's a future, at least from what I can see, that I do not wish to tolerate. And I'm sure the same is true of my colleagues. But the same is true of inflation as well. How can we be expected as youth, or as individuals at all for that matter, to build up capital and resources when the value of the dollar is diminishing, and not only so, but is actually plummeting every day? It's for that reason that the APP is advocating for the elimination of the government monopoly on the money supply, and is instead proposing that we adopt a system that introduces competition and checks and balances into the money market. You see, we have a problem. Government is able to print as much money as they want. They did so specifically over the last 2 years, but they've really been doing so for decades. And now, of course, as the reality that we have far more dollars than what the economy should actually have floating around, as prices continue to rise and as our wages are sticky, to use a quote, and don't rise near as quickly, the reality that inflation is crushing us is indeed doing that. And so that has to be changed. In this, our opportunity to change our future fortunes is before us right now. At present, we lie within a year, or maybe a few years at most, of striking distance from new powers that will refuse our resistance, so to say. We won't be able to resist this power again. But if we come together as one people, bound by law and the supremacy of God, again, as Mr. Gray has so eloquently stated, no matter our age, whether young or youthful or middle-aged or older, then we're confident that at the APP, we will become a strong and prosperous and sovereign and free nation, independent nation. And so that's my little presentation for the evening. I know it was not a typical presentation, but I had a lot of fun.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much, Tanner. I do know that, like you started to talk about the youth, and so my understanding is you guys are actually doing a youth event tomorrow.
Yes, that's right. We're actually
in.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
My brother and I are in King Canyon Park in Red Deer. We have we have an event for the youth or young adults, 18 to 29. It's in the evening. We're going to have a fire, very low key, very casual, something that, just guys my age and girls my age hanging out kind of thing, which we haven't been able to do for, 2 years. And so it's just going to be let's talk about how we can change that. Yeah.
That's great. I think having, the APP formal meetings and doing this sort of a webinar, and then you're doing your podcast, which I've been listening to, and they are great with Hunter as well.
They're fun. They're a lot of fun.
I love the banter at the beginning too. It's kind of what Chris and I do.
Yes, like you and Chris.
And so, yeah, I think having more of these type of community events, these if you're doing a youth event, there's no reason why we couldn't do a barbecue, an informal type of thing. So I think having APP minded people getting together for community, I think that's a great idea.
Absolutely.
The last thing I wanted to say, and it also deals with the university mindset in schools. So my daughters both just graduated from university within the last couple of years, and so I attended my youngest daughter's event last week, and they had 3 speakers there, and each of the 3 speakers talked about climate change, talked about sustainable development, and the people that were listening and the students ended up clapping. Like, it's almost like it's ingrained in their heads that climate change is a big, big, bad thing, and we all need to do something about it. Sustainable development is the only way we're going to be able to get through the next 100 years. What would you say to a student that has been indoctrinated with this philosophy? Would you be able to tell them to do their own research or do something like that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And you know what I would tell them first and foremost is to just see if they can just, research reality as it actually is. What I mean to say is, it might be that we hear these ideologues rise up on stage and they begin to talk about how we need to transition to a zero carbon future and how
Yes.
oil is bad, et cetera, et cetera. But look at the reality. The reality is that if Alberta were to transition to a totally renewable energy electrical grid, with just wind power and eliminate all fossil fuels from its power generation capacity, you would need, and this is a model that we were researching, it's on the Fraser Institute, you would need some 25 million wind turbines to be placed in the province. And even then, you would need a battery the size of Red Deer. Who knows if the power is going to be there or not? Look at the cell phone, look at your clothes, look at the computer. All of these things run on oil. And not only so, but specifically with regards to the environmental policy and the sustainable development and climate change, I'm a proponent of oil because it's increased the standard of living and the standard of life for literally countless billions of individuals in the society over the last however many hundreds of years. I say that using oil and using fossil fuels to better the life of others is a moral thing to do. It's not immoral. It's not something we should apologize for. I shudder to fear or to think about where we would be without oil, not only in this nation, but in nations around the world. And so when individuals, begin to discuss, an immediate removal or abolition of oil from our community and from our country itself, I think it's absolutely appalling. It's completely inexcusable, and it totally disregards the value of human life. And so, I know we tend to come at it from a scientific argument, and that's fair. That's a legitimate argument, but I would even talk about the morality of it and using oil to better the lives of others. And so, yes, I would say encourage them to do their own research, encourage them to look at the reality as it actually is, and encourage them, unlike the universities are right now, to think for themselves.
Yeah, very true. Thank you so much, Tanner.
And I know you have a hand up with Dennis.
We do. I do. Dennis, come on in and join the conversation.
Well, I was just going to comment very, very simply that, the issue of CO2 and climate change makes the assumption that CO2 produced by man's activities is contributing to climate change.
Yes.
For someone like myself, I've looked at scientific articles for decades. And I always look at the methodology first. If the methodology isn't valid, then the conclusion may or may not be valid. And so the point that I'm getting at is I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of articles. I've read books by Patrick Moore and others regarding climate change. And I cannot see any irrefutable evidence that man's contribution to CO2 in the atmosphere is at all responsible for climate change. Moreover, for those who have been concerned and have been predicting the apocalypse in the future because of climate change. Well, not one apocalyptic prediction yet has ever come true. We're presently looking at around 420 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere right now. It wasn't that long ago when it was 10 and 20,000 parts per million, at which time mankind was doing just fine, thank you, and plants were thriving. You got to think about CO2 as plant food. What do they put in greenhouses? They put in CO2 so plants grow. So, and I think the last thing I want to say about this is the whole climate change narrative started with Maurice Strong. He was a billionaire socialist from, he became wealthy from the oil patch. From Manitoba, who went to the United Nations and conceived of the idea of using climate change as a means of redistributing wealth. So think about that, and also think about our energy industry from the perspective that it produces over 6,000 products that the public needs and uses and wants all the time. And if you eliminated those products that can only arise from the hydrocarbon industry, we would literally go back to the Stone Age.
Yeah. Is that what the federal government is saying, is basically eliminating all oil products or all oil, or is it just a reduction?
No, and by 2030, it's a reduction by 42%, and to end it in its entirety by 2050, but very likely before that as well. Wow. So that is the plan. And, you know, when Maurice Strong conceived of the idea, it was to redistribute wealth from first world nations to third world nations to help build them up. But with the Great Reset occurring, now the intention is just for there to be a consolidation of wealth with the global elite, hollowing out the middle class and creating a permanent underclass.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that.
Carrie, can I just,
Dennis? Yes.
Can I just pipe in on that last
Yes,
environmental
absolutely.
point? A couple of things. First of all, people should check out a man named Bjorn Lomborg, who's a Swedish scientist who's written extensively on the global economic impacts of climate change. First of all, climate change is real, but what people like Bjorn Lomborg say quite correctly is that most of the environmental issues that found the sort of terror, the catastrophe, environmental catastrophe that Dr. Baudry was talking about, those problems have already been solved. And in fact, using hard economic data, Bjorn Lomborg has calculated that that the total impact of climate change in this century is going to be a fraction of 1%. In other words, we won't even notice it. And this is the thing that climate catastrophe does not take into account. It doesn't take into account the advancement of technology and human ingenuity. That's one thing. The other thing that's worth noting is, you know, I have a client who's a wealthy investor, and he winked at me one time when he told me this, and he said, "Leighton, you know, I look at commercial real estate, residential real estate investments all the time." And he does a lot of these, you know, in places that are very warm. And he says, you know, when we look at building, you know, condominiums, vacation condominiums on the beach in places like the Caribbean and Mexico,
yes.
says, I have not yet seen a prospectus that even mentions climate change.
Wow.
And banks and insurance companies are investing billions of dollars. So ask yourself, okay, these are pretty smart people who are tuned into the bottom line. If they thought that this stuff was real, do you really think that they'd be funding all of these resorts, resort condos on the beach if the oceans were going to rise, you know, and wash them away? So you know, this is really, a lot of this stuff is just you know, usually when someone's trying to scare you, it's a form of you know, of intimidation. So I just wanted to pipe in on that environmental issue. Thanks.
No, that's good. One of my favorite islands in the Caribbean is Turks and Caicos, Providenciales, and the amount of growth there, probably in the last 15, 20 years, is amazing. And I can totally say that if there was going to be an issue of that island being wiped out by rising ocean sea level, I don't think there would be any investment into there, because I think it really is 7 feet above sea level. That's how low it is. So interesting. So thank you very much, Clayton. And now we can actually see Dennis's face. Can I get a smile?
You can see me. I'll add one more comment, Carrie. You know, we have a massive carbon sump in this country as well, over 500 billion.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Agricultural lands that soak up that CO2. And we only produce 1.5% of the world's global CO2 emissions anyhow. But we are actually carbon negative in this country already by about tenfold, or maybe 20-fold. I just forget the exact number right now, meaning that carbon emissions could go up massively and we would still be carbon negative. And so what really is happening is this is an ideological discussion with respect to climate change, simply to shutter our industry, but until it's shuttered, to redistribute wealth.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and obviously that 40 cents or whatever per liter of gas that's going to the feds is obviously helping a lot with that. They must be putting into programs that are just shutting down this carbon. If you can't tell my hashtag sarcasm in my voice, then I'm certainly not doing it loud enough, I guess. So thank you very much. We're going to go to our next presenter, which is David Steckenrider, and he's the VP of Education for the Alberta Prosperity Project. He has indicated that he's not a big fan of introductions, so this is why it's probably the shortest introduction you'll hear all night. While the past is important, the future of Alberta is where he is focused. While being in full support of Tanner and our youth movement, his presentation this evening is focused on those who have made a few more trips around the sun. Please welcome David Steckenrider. And hopefully he does pop in. Very good.
Good evening. I would like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. I do apologize for my hat. I'm not trying to match our young Tanner, who's a hat aficionado, but it's actually for your own protection. Some of you may well remember the old Manfred Mann song from the 1970s, Blinded by the Light. Well, here's the reason. Don't you long for the good old days, back when we were younger? Of course, I'm not saying that we're old. We all know that 60 is the new 40, right? We still have lots of life left, and we have a lot to give. Things certainly seemed a lot easier 40 or 50 years ago. We could work hard, play hard, and life was bountiful if we were diligent. It was a good time to raise our kids. The streets were safe. None of this woke garbage was being shoved down our throat. Little kids didn't have to worry what gender they may or may not be. And 1 to 2% of the population were not dictating to us what we had to believe or that we were privileged by some miracle of birth. That makes me laugh. Privileged no, sorry, I better not say that. My family started in a sod hut in 1880 on the bald flat prairies. And when they graduated up, it was to a tar paper shack. There were no amenities, although come to think of it, my grandfather did say there was running water. He told me that when it rained heavily, the only dry place was under the kitchen table. There was no health care, no social services, nobody to whine to if their neighbor had something they didn't. In fact, there was a time when community meant something, and that neighbor probably shared what they had. It took a generation or maybe two before anyone might see the fruits of their labors. Nowadays, things move much more quickly. Mm-hmm. In reality, in the past 2 years, really, in a blink of an eye, just like that, our rights and freedoms have been stripped from us. We've been locked in our homes, unable to visit family and friends. We've had our families and friendships torn apart. And the frightening thing is, this is just the beginning. Let's take a step back and analyze the insanity of what's being forced upon us, or at least part of the population. the rule of law, our Constitution, the Criminal Code, our Charter of Rights, the Geneva Convention, the UN's International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights have been trampled on, not only by unelected civil minions, but by our elected politicians, people who were supposed to represent us, people who took a solemn oath to uphold our Constitution when they swear allegiance to the Queen. Generally, the oath goes something like this. I, David Steckenrider, swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law. So help me God. To most of us, this really doesn't say much. However, in a legal case, Roach versus Canada in 1994, Justice McEwen stated, an oath is a solemn declaration before God or on something sacred that a statement is true. The oath of allegiance to the Queen as head of state of Canada is binding in the same way as the rest of the Constitution of Canada, so long as the Constitution is unamended in that respect. Oaths or affirmations express a solemn intention to adhere to the symbolic keystone of the Canadian Constitution, thus pledging an acceptance of the whole of our Constitution and national life. That's written into law. Another view of this is from the Honorable Mike Harris, who was the former Premier of Ontario in 1993. The oath to the Queen is fundamental to the administration of law in this country. It signifies that here in Canada, justice is done, not in the name of the Prime Minister or a mayor or a police chief, as in totalitarian states, but by the people, in the name of the Queen. Personally, I have taken this oath. The big difference was after 6 years, I was not eligible for a cushy pension. And if I had been required, I, like every other soldier, would have had to step forward and put my life on the line. You should ask yourself, what has your member of parliament or your MLA done for you in the past 2 years? Let me think about that for a minute. Well, I don't need a minute because there's nothing to think about, and they did nothing for you. Nothing, absolutely nothing, and they will continue to do nothing for you. The UCP leadership race, as well as the federal conservative leadership race, is nothing. It's pure theater, and it's meant to distract you. Pierre Poilievre seems like the savior of Canada. He's young, intelligent, outspoken, dynamic, and an Albertan to boot. But take a closer look. It certainly seems that his leadership team are heavily involved with the World Economic Forum. And you must face one inevitable truth. Ontario and Quebec hold 199 out of 338 seats in the House of Commons.
That's right.
They are the two provinces that can get Pierre elected. So in the end, Alberta will not matter. He must cater to the demands of the East. So you may ask yourself, what can I do about it? The lockdowns have left many people feeling isolated, alone, and helpless. But I want to tell you a little secret. We only need 3.5% of the population to influence a change in government. If that's the case, we've got this hands down. Between the ages of 60 and 75 in 2019, there were 516,945 voters. When has any political party ever paid any serious attention to the baby boomers? If we stretch out that age limit a bit, just a bit, between the ages and 50 and 80, if I ask for a show of hands, we could see 885,210 people. Just think about that for a minute. That's 1/3 of all of the votes in Alberta. In the last provincial election, 70% of Albertans voted. There were 2,800,000 people eligible to vote. if all of the graying population had voted, at least in that age range, that would be almost half the votes and assuredly would win an election. So don't be sitting at home thinking you can't do anything. If you care about the future of your children and your grandchildren, if you want to see a free and healthy Alberta, then it's time to get out of the rocking chair. We need to mobilize, whether you need a walker or a wheelchair, a scooter or a cane. Yes, we, the graying population that often gets marginalized, can be the change. We can be a gray tsunami sweeping across Alberta. Go to our website, look at our map, and see if there are any chapters near you. If there are one, join one. If not, start one. Get some brochures, keep them in your golf cart. Take them to your morning get together at the local coffee shop. If you're retired or out of work, volunteer. If you have mobility issues, get on your phone and talk to everybody that you know. We have less than 1 year to get organized. This is the one chance we truly have to influence the future. For now, this moment, we, the 500,000, are the future. We can do this. Very rarely in history do people get the opportunity to influence such a major change in a governmental system for the better. We can write a new constitution. We can create a Bill of Rights that prevents any government or non-elected official to ever lock us in our homes again. We have to forget about the concept of left or right, or the color of your political stripe. The old system doesn't work anymore. The last 2 years are proof of that.
Yeah.
They were not pleasant and probably would have been even more unpleasant under any other political regime. Governments have lost their way. And unfortunately, once upon a time, life was easier. Perhaps we were even complacent, but we need change now. The American president, Theodore Roosevelt, said, "The government is us. We are the government. You and I." The Supreme Court Justice of US, Felix Frankfurter, said, "In a democracy, the highest office is the office of the citizen." So isn't it time that we become the government? That we, the people, assume that highest office? I'd like to finish with a great quote from a Canadian politician. But unfortunately, our so-called leader only seems to be capable of theatrics and doublespeak. So I will leave you with one final thought. John Fitzgerald Kennedy said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." You know what Alberta could be. You've lived it. So the future of your children and your grandchildren and our country, a free and sovereign Alberta, are in your hands. It's time to take action now. Remember, for the next year, based on the numbers of loan, we can change the future in this short moment of time. Perhaps for one last time in history, you and I can be the future. Thank you.
David, that was great. Thank you so much. If you couldn't tell, that was a pre-recorded message. And when I talked to David earlier today, he basically said it was because he has 5 dogs and the dogs would be barking all the way through a presentation. So he filmed that at 4 a.m. But basically, it's exactly what he wants to say. And I think he is still online here. So if he wanted to chime in and say anything above that, I guess the big thing that I took away from that is, number one, I'm definitely in the 50 plus. And that's the first time I've actually heard that we have such a large voice in Alberta. And likewise, I've heard the term of voter apathy and not being able to vote. Can you imagine if all of us that were in that number actually got up off of our couches and 2-hour walkers or whatever needed to be in order to actually get and vote?
We have the numbers, and
Yes.
I fully support. I mean, we need to support our kids, because I'm in that age range where there's kids and there's grandkids.
Yeah.
And the youth and the great work that Tanner and Hunter are doing, that's extremely important, and the input that they have. But we also know from talking to a lot of the younger people that are in the 18 to 20 year range that they're not sure. And again, because of the indoctrination they've been given.
Yes. Yeah.
But we have the power in that 50 plus range. If everybody got out and was supportive of this idea, we can make it happen.
Yeah.
We just have to get everybody on side, because the numbers are there.
Yeah.
And we've got way more than 3.5% to swing this. And that's why Dr. Modre pushes the 500,000 to 1 million, because we've got 500,000. We've got almost 900,000 if we go 50 to 80. So it can happen.
Yeah, and definitely being members and having a membership is great. But I've often said the analogy is that there are certain people that can't seem to be involved in an APP for various reasons, and everyone's got their own reason. And I've said to people before, so when voting comes along, you're going to be a sleeper agent, meaning that no matter what you do throughout this entire year, what really matters is the way you vote and actually getting out there to vote, because that could totally change things and change the climate come May of 2023.
Well, this is it. And like I said, it's once in a more than a lifetime opportunity to see actual change. And like Leighton said, I mean, we've been looking at different constitutional models, and there's some other ones I'm going to pass on them as well, because there's some great Indigenous governance that's happened, even back to when the Europeans were calling the American Indians savages. They had a 2-tier governmental system in the 1200s. So we've got a lot to learn.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you so much, David. I think you're going to stick around for any questions and answers for that. And so our next guest is a well-known, courageous defender of rights and freedoms, a folk hero, if you will. I have heard him speak on many occasions, and I've actually ridden out to Ottawa with him. And I can honestly say that the energy he brings when he gets a hold of a microphone or onto a stage will spark a passion in you that will have you wanting to be part of something that is history in the making. He has also put on so many miles, not just in Alberta, but elsewhere as well. He is a household name, and his popularity grows. He once said, sometimes to do the right thing, I'm going to start that again because it's so worth noting. He once said, sometimes to do the right thing, one has to stand up and be alone. But when you do the right thing, you're only alone for a moment. And he is right. He knows there are people who are still fighting for their lives, their livelihoods, their futures, and so much more. He advocates for that, and he inspires others to want to do that too. He advocates for truth. He advocates for kindness. He advocates for understanding for those who have a different perspective. And I can tell you firsthand that his burgers are second to none, and his pancakes and eggs Benedict are pretty much on my list as well. The reason he's last is because we really need to get him to be constrained in times, because he'll go off for another hour or two talking, and we want to try and wrap this up by 9ish. But let me say, ladies and gentlemen, from the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta, my amigo, Mr. Chris Scott.
Well, thank you very much, Kerry. I actually thought you were going to say that I put on a ton of weight.
Just look sideways.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just keep my neck out of the frame. So, yeah, like usual, I don't actually have anything prepared. I've been listening to the other panelists, and I've been thinking about what our landscape in this province looks like right now, specifically against the backdrop of this leadership contest. I've been talking to a lot of people about this, mostly at the West Stop, because as you know, Carrie, I can't really get away from that place for
Nope.
very long. And I do enjoy it. It's great. One thing that I am very blessed to have learned getting out of the energy industry and getting into the hospitality industry is that I actually do like to serve. I like to cook people food. I like to pour their coffees. I like to watch the look on their face when they try our burgers or they try our food. It's very satisfying to know that I've done something that even if it's in some small little way has made someone's day better. And that's not me. I've never been like that in my life. I mean, probably like anybody else, I have a good feeling when I do something nice for someone else, but this is different. There's a big difference between doing something for someone and serving them. So as I ponder current events and this leadership contest and knowing what I know, and I'm hoping what most people are at least starting to realize by now about the path that some of these global elite folks want for us. It's occurred to me that it's more important than ever for people to become servants to each other. Now, what I mean by that isn't like you need to go shine your neighbor's shoes, but what I mean to say is we have to start thinking about how is what we're going to do today going to make things better for us and our friends and neighbors. And I really hope that some of these leadership hopefuls are this weighs very heavily on their shoulders, because our government, our MLAs, our MPs, even our reeves and councilmen and councilwomen, they're charged with a very important task, and that task is to, from a legislator point of view, is to enact laws on our behalf. We require laws in a society because as there's more and more people and we're living closer together, we want to minimize the impacts we have on each other. But at the same time, we have to balance our societal impacts with people's individual rights and freedoms. And that's one of the reasons why Canada has always been the greatest country in the world to live. Individual rights and freedoms that were supposed to be held at in the highest priority. Mm-hmm. The Constitution Act 1982, which is the supreme law of the land, it enshrines our rights and freedoms. And it tells us that as Canadians, and more specifically as human beings, these are rights that we are born with. They're not rights and freedoms that our government gives us or can take from us at their leisure. They're rights and freedoms that government and society as a whole acknowledges that we're born with. And when you think about the last 2.5 years and what the country is supposed to look like and how the supreme law of the land is supposed to protect us, there's a very disturbing disconnect there. Mm-hmm. My situation, being jailed for contempt of court for holding a protest against rules that said I couldn't earn a living or I couldn't gather with my friends and neighbors, are very minor compared to what other folks have endured. There are people who have literally lost their loved ones due to the restrictions themselves. There are people that continue to be subjected to medical interventions that they don't need, but they're pressured to get. I just heard a story of another one in Piers, Alberta, who did the right thing, even though they didn't want to do that, mm-hmm. and they suffered terrible consequences for it. We have federally regulated companies that are slowly starting to drop these mandates. And now there are folks who have been hung out to dry for the last 5 months that are like, well, we stood our ground because we have bodily autonomy. We have rights over our own bodies and we exercise that. And now you're asking us to come back to work after you treated us like a piece of crap. Like people are still suffering, and as the summer continues and actually really gets rolling, people are forgetting about this. They're golfing, they're out camping, they're doing whatever, they're having fun, they're taking back their lives that they didn't get to live over the last 2.5 years. But people are still suffering, people are still dying. The effects of these mandates and these restrictions and this interference with our rights and freedoms as human beings is ongoing. And with all that said, specifically regarding my experiences and my situation I'm in with my restaurant and my court challenges and all of those things, I've always said right from the beginning that the only thing, the only thing we have to do, the solution is to stand up, say enough is enough, use your voice, and just claim your rights and freedoms that you've always had. You know, the government can't actually take them away from you. They can pretend to take them away from you for a time, but in the end, the truth will prevail. And well, I'm hoping it will. The truth will prevail, and it'll come out in the wash that should have never happened. We're starting to see that just a little bit. Mm-hmm. So, solutions. What is the solution? I get asked this all the time, and I tell people the solution is to use your voice, mm-hmm. stand up for yourself. And as one person doing that, I can tell you it's very intimidating. It's very frightening. You don't really know if you're going to win or lose. You just know that it's something you have to do because it's the right thing, so you do it. But like you said, Carrie, when you do that and it's the right thing and people take notice, especially people that have been looking for solutions and they're looking for something to hope in, they will stand with you. Now, how does that relate to the Alberta Prosperity Project? Well, you can change the scale of what I just talked about into a country. So if your country, and of course we're talking about Canada right now, is treating your province unfairly within the system and the structure that is supposed to enshrine your individual rights and freedoms, and they have no intention of stopping that, apologizing for it, making any sort of remedy, and they want to further encroach on your rights and freedoms going forward, what do? Well, you stand up and you use your voice and you say, enough is enough. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to eat crickets. Well, actually, I might eat crickets because I love food and I love trying new things. But you better damn well let it be my choice if I'm going to eat crickets or beef. Yeah. It's something we have to do. I can't see anything changing on a federal level, at least within the structure we have right now. And David mentioned that we are severely underrepresented in Alberta within the House of Commons. Our voice when it comes to federal politics is very weak. It's very difficult for us to make any kind of changes in federal law that benefit us. But we have a very unique opportunity here in Canada, at least. Here in Canada, the provinces and the colonies join confederation of their own free will. And it was never said to be a permanent deal. Mm-hmm. It was a relationship that was like the East courted us. And they said, you know what, we should have this relationship. It's going to be better for all of us. It's better when we're all together, right? And we said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. So we entered into this relationship within Confederation. And as time has gone on, we've discovered that this is a very one-sided and abusive relationship. Alberta has been the whipping boy of Confederation, along with most of the other Western provinces as well. They've been the whipping boys of Confederation almost since the very beginning. Yeah. And we've been trying, specifically in Alberta, for at least the last 50 years. And actually, the man that really kicked this off, the man that lit the fire under Albertans to stand up and say enough is enough, this is ridiculous, we want out, it was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Mm. And that image of him flipping the bird to Alberta as he left, that speaks volumes. Mm-hmm. He made Albertans pay attention and realize that they would never get a fair deal within Confederation. And so the separatist movement began back in the early 80s. And for 50 years, there's been all sorts of different groups, different politicians, different people attempt to fix things for Alberta. And it continues to this day. Roman Weber, a CPC leadership hopeful, who is a very nice guy, has some great ideas. He tells me that he wants to fix things for Alberta. And And I would say that would be wonderful. However, if you look at the past 50 years and all the attempts that have been made to fix things or make things more fair for us in the West here, they've all failed. I would say that we've exhausted almost every avenue, probably every avenue we have to fix things within the Confederation. The one thing we haven't done, the one thing that we lacked the entire time we were trying to get a better deal was leverage. Now, Dr. Modry explained very, very well why a successful referendum on independence is the only leverage that we could ever hope to use in negotiations against the federal government. So I'm not going to go into that too much. But now knowing how poorly the system has treated us, how much people have suffered, the plan that is laid out for us, the path that's laid out for us to walk into the own nothing and be happy, knowing that we have voices, we have the right to say enough is enough. Would it not be fair to say that we actually have a responsibility to do that? Not just for me and my restaurant, not just for you, Carrie, and you lost a business, you and Marla.
Yeah.
But for the generations that are going to come after us. What are we going to leave them? Are we going to leave them a messed up pseudo-democratic society in which you have to do things to your body in order to participate in society? Or are we going to uphold the values and the ideals that Canada was founded on and demand that our individual rights and freedoms be recognized, and that democracy and our voices will be recognized going forward, regardless of what anybody around us wants to put us through? We have folks that want us to freeze and starve in the dark. Well, we won't be starving because we'll eat crickets or cockroaches. Cockroach plants are big in China. It's a very, very healthy protein, by the way, although I'm not going to try it. They tell us we have to freeze in the dark because if we don't, if us carbon-based life forms exist and prosper, we will cause the planet to light on fire by 2016. Wait a minute. That never came true.
No.
My point is, these ideologies that are being they're being cited as justification to put us all in these little boxes, stop driving our cars, eat bugs instead of beef, stop using fossil fuels, and I'm not even going to call them fossil fuels anymore, stop using hydrocarbons. This is being purported to be to our benefit and to save our lives, and it's not. The science doesn't back it up. The predictions have never come true. And actually, you had asked, or somebody had asked the question, what do university students do when they're constantly this stuff is being pushed on them?
Yes. Yeah.
And I would answer that by saying, in all interactions, be respectful. Be respectful of everybody. However, question everything. Don't just take things for face value. There's a lot of things we were told in the last 30 years, at least when I've been kind of paying attention, that were so alarming. It was climate alarmism. And I remember going home from school and telling my mom she had to throw out all her hairspray because she was killing the ozone layer and going to kill the planet for all of us kids. There's going to be nothing left. The alarmism has been used for decades, yet none of these things have come true. And we're still being forced down these paths. So the solution is to stand up and use their voice. Even more so important for those who want to have the job of legislating on our behalf or speaking on our behalf. And now I'm specifically talking about Alberta MLAs or even leadership hopefuls. They have a responsibility to start standing up and doing some of the stuff. What I've seen lately, everything that's come out has been complete fluff, insignificant, vote buying. I'm sorry, you want to give me a rebate on my transmission and distribution charge on my gas bill or my power bill? I'm not really interested in that. What I'm interested in is a solution in which we can be in a structure where those things aren't allowed to happen to us in the first place. I mean, you don't treat an axe wound with a Band-Aid. And that's all we're getting right now is Band-Aids. So I'm really hoping that somebody steps up and has the intestinal fortitude to start speaking the truth and be real leaders instead of these fake poll hounding politicians who simply want to do what they think will get them elected. We need some serious leadership. And that those folks that want to be our leaders, the beautiful thing with the Alberta Prosperity Project is the work is already being done. The path is being laid out. There's justification for it. There's legal reference for it. Every tool you need to do what you have to do to return Alberta to a strong, free, and prosperous either province or nation is laid out there for you. All you have to do is have the courage to do it. And like I said before, you might think you're going to be alone if you stand up and you stick your neck out and you speak out and say, hey, maybe we do need a referendum to use as leverage against the federal government. You will not be alone. And the Alberta Prosperity Project is showing you that. Building the membership, packing venues everywhere we go, constant messages. This should give you all the courage you need to do the right thing. And I really hope that this doesn't fall on deaf ears because, like David said, we may not have much of a chance to do this in the future. We may not have a chance at all. Because as things are progressing, well, we're already going to be eating crickets. They're vilifying the beef industry. They vilified the energy industry. Agriculture will come next. You think dairy is safe? I'm sorry, dairy's not safe either. Those cows have more flatulence than Kerry after Chris and Kerry show when he drinks all that Bud Light Lime.
True story.
And so what I'm saying is, if we don't act now, we might not have a chance, but we still do have a chance. So I would encourage everybody to at least start questioning everything. And when your questions, when you get some answers to your questions that make you realize that, yes, we do need to do something and we do need to stand up, there is a path laid out for you. And the path that the Alberta Prosperity Project is advocating for will 100% result in a free, prosperous, and independent nation of Alberta. Now, with that, there is something that I fail to talk about a lot because I can't see it happening. There's a lot of folks who believe that we're dirty separatists. I've heard that word a lot. And while I may be dirty because I cooked in the restaurant all day over a deep fryer, I'm not a separatist. I believe in independence, and I certainly believe in that referendum. So there is a chance that with a successful referendum on independence, that maybe Ottawa would say, okay, you know what, Alberta, we're going to fix this for you. We're going to give you a better deal. You guys can be free. You guys can be prosperous. And that will be awesome. I can't see it happening, but it may. Either case, the thing that has to happen first is we need to have that referendum. All of the other solutions that are being advocated for by other groups, they have their merits. And they certainly have some of them, they look great, they sound great, but they fail to take hold of that leverage that we need to truly make a difference, not just for this next election, not just for the next 4 years, but for the long term in this province. That's the key. And it's also, like Dennis mentioned, Alberta is leading by example and showing the rest of the provinces that they don't have to go down this path. I would say that the vast majority of Canadians, maybe I'll say the large fringe majority, the vast majority of Canadians would like to be free and prosperous and free from all of this garbage that's been shoved down our throats. And if they do, this is a path for them as well. And if we lead by example here in Alberta and we show the rest of the province and the rest of the world really that as human beings with inherent rights and freedoms, we don't have to be slaves to tyranny. That is the most compassionate and responsible thing that we as Albertans could do potentially for the rest of our lives. So I hope that's encouraging and answers questions. And I suppose if there's more questions, or have there been, Elaine? Was there any questions?
Yes,
that came up?
there is. And all I was going to say is, remember back in the day when sitcoms would actually have laugh tracks? I think, Alan, we should have a clap track for a lot of these speakers, because that's been amazing. And I know if you were standing in front of a group of people right now, they would be standing and clapping. So thank you so much for everything that you've done and stood up for, Chris.
And actually, Zoom allows people to clap, and it's
yes,
just
I can
flying
see
all
the
over
thumbs
place.
up, and yeah, it is great. Like
so we've had a really, really good response. We are running a little bit over time. We will take the time we need for Q&A. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A and in the comments that I've written.
I'm just going to touch on one real quick here, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So Donna commented, I learned so much this evening, and support should now grow as we see it is not another, I'm assuming it's so that we don't have another party to split votes. Thanks for the.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's important to note. This path that the Alberta Prosperity Project is advocating for is not only for one political party or the next. This is available to everybody. The intellectual property is freely shared. If any political party wants to explore this and get on board with ensuring a free and prosperous Alberta for the long term, they're more than welcome to. The UCP could do this. The NDP could do this if they really wanted to, but they probably won't, because the company has a Karl Marx manifesto for their manifesto. But the Independence Party of Alberta, the Wild Rose Independence Party of Alberta, they could all do this thing. This isn't about a party. This is about an idea that people can get behind and show in a tangible way through membership and fundraising and advertising. Show those political parties that if they want to make government, this is what we want. And when the membership grows to that 3.5% or more, and it will be more, the political parties are going to be banging on the door, trying to get the support of this group. That's why it's so important to build this membership.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know, yes, we are going to be jumping into some questions and answers, but I do want to give you a little bit of a plug, because I know one of the next big APP events is happening at the Whistle Stop on Saturday. Did you want to briefly talk about that, like within 30 seconds?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, you said within 30 seconds, so I thought it was over. So yeah, we're hosting the Alberta Prosperity Project at the Whistle Stop Cafe this weekend, Saturday, June 25th. And we're gonna have a barbecue. We're gonna have some live music. Carrie, are we still playing in the band?
We have no idea yet. I don't even know what I'm doing in an hour from now. So
okay, you're probably sleeping. Anyway, yeah, we're gonna have a barbecue. There's gonna be some speakers. We're gonna have the live music, and it's just gonna be a great time. I've been saying that we need to start having backyard barbecues and meeting people where they're at and talking to people. So this is kind of along those same lines. So it'll be a great time for everybody for the whole day.
Yeah, very good.
Oh, and should I mention who's playing in the band? Whose band it is?
I think that would be a good thing to say.
Yeah, so the band's name is Diesel, right?
Right.
Yeah, and the lead singer is a lady who you may know. Her name is Tamara Leach.
That's right.
Yeah. Also believes in freedom.
A lot of people didn't even know that she played in a band and sang. And
you know what? For somebody that's not even quite as tall as you, she's got some pipes.
She does. Absolutely.
Gentlemen, would you please turn your cameras on? Dennis, Slayton, Tanner, we're going to enter the Q&A right now. Sorry for cutting the banter between our two teenagers.
Yeah, you had to. It'll never end.
Okay, well, I have a lot of questions, and I'm going to start pretty well random here, and they are varied on who they're directed to. So then we have a fellow that unfortunately I had to let him go.
Yes.
But he had some really pointed questions. So I'm going to read the 3 questions, and I think some of it can be answered by Dennis and Tanner and whoever else wants to jump in. So Brent said, Alberta cannot survive as a sovereign nation. It will cost millions to set up a military, currency, police force, etc. The USA will not trade with Alberta as an independent nation. The only option is becoming a US state. From the sound of it, no one on here really wants to separate from Canada. Canada will never recognize Alberta as an independent sovereign nation. Where will we have an ocean port to transport our oil? Where will we get our military? All of our bases are owned by the Crown. All airports are owned by the Crown. The reason I bring these questions is that for two reasons. It's a common question I've heard on the street, and you all have. And the second reason is that there's been a lot of acidic or acerbic or whatever negative language around these questions in the chat room. So unfortunately, I had to let Brent go. But you go. It's a lot of questions in here, but there's a lot of negative thought about what can we do and what we can't do. So maybe, Dennis, you could start on that.
Sure. Well, to begin with, this comes from an ideology of individuals, and there are a number of individuals in Alberta that would prefer that Alberta become the 51st state of the United States. That's number one. Number two, though, is that with respect to the military, that really isn't an issue because, with respect to Alberta having a military, well, we would simply form our own military. And many of the people that are in the military right now would align with Alberta and become part of the Alberta military. So I don't really think that is an issue. And from the perspective of our military, if you consider how our vets have been treated by the federal government, I can assure you that a new sovereign Alberta nation would not treat our vets the way they have been treated by the federal government. And in that context alone, it would be enticing for Canadian military who would prefer to be in Alberta to align with Alberta. From a cost perspective, we would have no problem funding an Alberta military. Moreover, what we know from contacts already with the US, they would welcome Alberta as a sovereign nation. For Alberta to go from where we are now to Alberta 51 is a stretch that just isn't going to fly with the majority of Albertans. The majority of Albertans want freedom and prosperity, but they don't necessarily want to jump into bed with the US, yet they want to align with the US. And there's no question, particularly under a Republican administration, that they would be extremely supportive of Alberta becoming an independent nation. They would still have access to our bases. They would train with an Alberta military. They would have access through Alberta to the north. We would develop that rail line from Alberta to Alaska, which is something that they want. We provide energy security. And on the issue of trade, Tanner and I both talk about this extensively, but in a nutshell, there'll be no problem with trade relations with the US. 90% to 95% of our trade goes south. We'll have no problem with access to tidewater for a variety of reasons. And the most relevant of which is that the federal government and the other provinces are going to want to trade with us. It wouldn't be in their interest to embargo Alberta. It would harm them even more than it would harm us because we can be literally self-sufficient given our resources. But with respect to dealing with an intransigent federal government or provinces, as Alberta has, as Tanner has so eloquently stated previously, we have far more control as an independent nation than we do now. We're landlocked, yes, but we are really policy locked. We're only landlocked in the context that we can't move the region, but we are really only policy locked. And if we were dealing with an intransigent Ottawa, well, we can put massive tariffs on trade that goes east and west. And if that didn't work, we could stop trade altogether from going east and west in terms of flyovers. So we're not without clout as an independent nation at all. Now, I don't know if that sufficiently answered the question, Elaine, if there was any other nuance to the questions that were posed. Go ahead, Chris.
So I just have something to add really quickly. They mentioned that the Crown owns this and the Crown owns that. Well, that's a common misconception that people have, is that the Crown owns things here. The way that works is the Crown actually holds things for us in trust. It's ours. They're like our mommy, and they're keeping it there for us until we grow up and we're ready to use it. So those things, they've always belonged to us. They're just in kind of a trust fund. So that's something I don't think is a concern. Tanner's can probably speak to this better, but I quickly looked at the numbers, how much the Canadian government spends on military in a year, with the military budget. It wasn't really that much money. And I started thinking, if Alberta had unobstructed trade with the United States, we could move our products. We were keeping money that at the moment we are sending to the federal government, and they're using it to further their sustainable development plan. If we kept that money in our pocket, we should very easily be able to fund a world-class military, which is something that we don't have right now. A lot of these things that people are talking about, we don't really have them. Canada has a military, yes. There's thousands of incredibly brave men and women who want to serve their country. And the people are awesome, but the military as a whole has been completely gutted over the last 40 years. We are not the world power we used to be military-wise in Canada. So you could almost say, aside from small sorties here and there, we don't really have an effective military. It's something we don't have right now. We don't have effective and robust trade north, south, east, and west right now in our current situation. So those are things we're already starting at a disadvantage, and we only have an opportunity to improve. Now, I'm just going to quickly touch on the 51st state idea and why I didn't get on board with this in the beginning when I first heard. Now, do I have a problem with the United States of America? No, I do not. I think they're absolutely wonderful. However, they are not without their own problems. Now, for me, if I'm going to, as an Albertan, figuratively exit an abusive relationship with my country or Canada Confederation, I'm not going to go and get into another abusive relationship right away. That would be stupid. The US has their problems. Their constitution, I believe, is probably better than ours. However, it's not. We've seen in the last few years, they're victims of wokeness, cancel culture, critical race theory, all of the things that we want to get away from here. So why would we, in God's name, exit this relationship, do something as monumental as leaving Confederation, and inherit somebody else's problems? Especially considering that the president's not even alive at the moment. It boggles my mind why we do that. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Chris. As usual, you always have a way with words that's impressive. I know that, David, I'll let you pose your question quickly.
Well, mine's not a question. I'm just going to add more in on the military, is that we have 20 reserve units from as far north as Cold Lake to down to Lethbridge. Most of the reserve units are staffed by Albertans who are part-time military and usually full-time other jobs.
That's right.
In every other war we're not going into a war. I just don't see it happening. But our full-time Red Forces in the other wars were built out of the reserve units. So we already have the seed group that can happen. As Dr. Modry said, we would also have this negotiated and have been building a military along with that as we move forward. So we've got lots of opportunities. I've served, Alan served. I don't see that we have any real possibilities in building our own military. And there are some really interesting, unique things that they can be tasked to do that have been federal government processes and jobs in Alberta, but could be part of our military and make use of them better in peacetime. So yeah, I think we're really well covered in the military.
And let's remember that the West Edmonton Mall, who's in Edmonton, Alberta, has more submarine than the Canadian Army.
They're gone now, though.
Oh yeah, no, there's storage.
Alberta Health Services has more staff than the entire Canadian military.
Yeah.
Okay, my next question is a redirect to Leighton about this crown property, what happened constitutes, because we're gonna if we separate, it's going to be a legal move. It's going to be a constitutional move. And the second question is, someone, Rochelle, sent information to APP yesterday from Catherine Watts' Substack, which explains all the law that were changed in the U.S. to permit all the the COVID shenanigans to happen. Is this what happened here in Canada? Did the laws get changed for them to make the mandates and stuff like that, or did they just do it without changing the laws, but simply by order in council? Leighton, you're muted.
So the question is whether the Crown in right of Canada owns land in Alberta. Is that the question?
That is the first question. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my understanding of the process that would occur following the referendum is that there would be negotiation, and Dr. Moji can probably speak to this better than I can, but my understanding is that there would be negotiation with Canada. And this is an important point because there seems to be this perception that Alberta would be landlocked and that we'd be at a real disadvantage and so on. What's contemplated is that there would be negotiation, amicable, reasonable negotiation between Canada and Alberta concerning what the sort of post-separation relationship will be. And I would think that as part of those negotiations, there would be discussion about federal crown lands. I expect that the position of Alberta would be, at least if I was on the legal team, would be that those lands have to be ceded to Alberta. They're in Alberta. It would make no sense for Canada to own crown land in Canada. You know, I have to say something that might offend some people about this concept of. It's very fashionable nowadays to talk about, and they do this before the Oilers games. You know, Wilton Littlechild comes on and he does this sort of land acknowledgement, which I find very bizarre. That we're acknowledging that this land belonged to certain, native tribes, and of course, there's always a list of indigenous peoples that once owned this land, because before Europeans arrived here, it was there was perpetual conquest. This is the nature of human beings, of human societies, that there's conquest. So it doesn't make sense to me on that level. But it's sort of like this. This is how I see these land acknowledgements. It's almost like I've got my car in the driveway. It's a new car. It's a really nice car. My neighbor comes over every morning, and before he gets in my car and drives away in my car, he goes, "This is Leighton's car." Everybody screams to my neighbors, "This is Leighton's car." And then he gets in my car and drives away. That's what these land acknowledgements are. They're nothing but absurd, insulting virtue signaling. This is the worst kind. This shows no regard for Indigenous peoples. It shows no regard, no respect whatsoever. In fact, it's disrespectful. My neighbor has no intention of ever giving me back my car. I will never drive that car again. So these land acknowledgements really are foolish, I think, just absolute rubbish that are perpetuating this this paternalistic relationship that we've had with Canada for so long. So I just wanted to add that thought. And Carrie, I'm not criticizing you because you sort of made an overture about an acknowledgement for this call, and this is just my opinion.
Yeah.
But I find that these land acknowledgements are just really silly and childish, and I wish that they would stop. It actually triggers me so much that I have to turn off this part of the, and they actually do it before they play the national anthem, and I have to sort of turn this off. And it's actually troubling because I actually have a lot of respect for Wilton Littlechild. He had a very distinguished legal career. He's a judge now, and he was a great hockey player at the University of Alberta, Gold Bears. And so anyway, that's just an aside. But the other question, Adeline, what was the other legal question? Sorry, I got off on a tangent there. I was doing my best Christopher Scott impersonation.
That's all right. The other question was relating to the American having changed laws so they could make their mandates. Did Canada change law? They just simply went like an order in council and that kind of stuff. Just clarity on that.
Well, this is a very interesting point because I don't think many people realize this. This is a bit technical, but in the early days of COVID, and I can just speak specifically to Alberta, what the Kenney government did is they went in and they changed the machinery of the Public Health Act in order to basically set up a system where they could use a statute that is a creature of of democracy, to set up a medical dictator who then became the most powerful person in the history of our province. And she still is ruling over us. The most powerful person right now is Dina Hinshaw. She's not answerable to cabinet. She's not answerable to the legislature. She's not answerable to Albertans. In fact, she hasn't listened to us at all in 2.5 years. She's not going to. These, and then of course, we've been fighting this through the Ingram case and otherwise, for years. In terms of our relationship with the federal government, it's significant to know that the federal government actually has no constitutional authority over health at all. And it's a consternation to me that the federal government has a health minister. That would be like Alberta having an aviation minister or a minister of fisheries, or a postal minister. The federal government has been doing this, and I'm showing my my bias here. The Prime Minister's office, since the time of the first Trudeau, who I call Jaws, and Justin Trudeau I call Jaws 2. Between Jaws and Jaws 2, what they've been doing is they've been vacuuming up all the political power in this country and focusing it in the Prime Minister's office. And if you remember the Lord of the Rings, that's like the Eye of Sauron right now. And what they're doing is and this is part of what the APP, I think, is designed to change. And Tanner and Dr. Mojer can talk about this, but part of what's happening in our country right now is through excessive taxation, all the money is being drawn out, sucked out of the local communities. It's going to Ottawa. Mm-hmm. Instead of having that money stay in our communities to fund things like health and education and everything else that's important locally, the things that were set up originally under Confederation to be dealt with locally. The federal government sucks all that money out of the communities, and then we have to go hat in hand to Ottawa to beg for money for health, because all the money that would have gone to fund our hospitals and our doctors and our nurses, it's gone to Ottawa. And this is the way that Ottawa, and specifically the Prime Minister's office, has perverted and inverted the structure of Confederation. And it's part of the reason, a big part of the reason why we have to get out, because this is not going to change. The consolidation of power in the Prime Minister's office is continuing every single day. And there's just more and more offensive, undemocratic, frightening bills, which, for example, there's a law that's in the Senate right now, which would prohibit this conversation, which would deplatform this entire conversation. We would not be able to meet over Zoom.
That's right.
We would not be able to watch what we want to watch on YouTube when those censorship laws go into effect. Those laws that have been created by this evil federal government are right straight out of North Korea. It's abhorrent to me that these laws are being created in my country, the country in which I was raised. This federal government has no concept of liberal democracy, has no understanding of finance. Clearly, the Prime Minister has said this many, many times. But this is I'm describing in broad terms what the situation is with health. Yes, we do need to be concerned about the fact that our federal government is convinced that we are living in eternal COVID world. They even want to continue an abbreviated parliament where we won't even have our legislature sit fully. We seem to be the only country in the world who's still doing this. But it's a power grab, and the reason why it is possible is because we haven't had a provincial government that's been willing to stand up for Alberta. And I know some of the leaders, for example, Danielle Smith, who was on my podcast recently, and Brian Jean are talking about sovereignty through something like a Sovereignty Act. But that's only paper. That is not going to protect us from what's going on. And this is why I become involved with APP. I'm convinced this is the only way that we can preserve and protect prosperity, the rights of the individual, preserve our culture from this attack, from this eye of Siren. This is an evil government that we have in Ottawa, and it's not going to stop until we own nothing and like it. So I know I bounced around there on a lot of different topics, but hopefully I answered those questions.
I think you did very well. And I
Elaine,
think
Elaine,
Dennis can add to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to be very explicit. So with the next provincial government negotiating with a mandate through a referendum on independence, those negotiations would go along these lines. Crown land belongs to Alberta. That's it, period. End of discussion.
Yeah.
With respect to why these darn mandates were implemented on us, you got to look as well at Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which abridges individual freedoms and rights. And that's one of the problems, is that when you have societal rights, well, let me rephrase it. When individual rights are looked after, societal rights are looked after, but the reverse never holds. So I know that with Layton's redrafting of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, there will be no such clause that will abridge individual freedoms and rights, in which case a mandate or mandates to the kind of mandates that were implemented to restrict our freedoms and to force us to wear masks, not travel, and the rest of it, that will never happen again.
Okay, my next question is for Tanner, if you could unmute yourself. Sorry, I'm gonna get my question here. So Tanner, what are you suggesting for seniors with RSPs at 65? We want out, but a 30% penalty, what can we do?
Well, I'm obliged. It's a good question. I'm obliged to say at the start that because we're a nonprofit organization and because I'm not a financial advisor, we're not legally allowed to give advice. And so the first thing I would say is honestly, head to a financial advisor that you trust and that you know understands what's happening and what's going on, and say, listen, if this prospect, say Alberta independence, were to occur, what steps would you take to mitigate risk and so on? So that would be the advice that I would give. I mean, again, because we can't give financial advice. It's just not within our wheelhouse to do so. But speaking to the larger idea of investments and all of these things, look even at what's happening right now. You know, it's quite right that people are concerned about their investments. The stock market is crashing. And the reason for that, of course, is because when government pumped all of this money into Canada, when they printed all of this money during COVID and during this crisis, some of it went to you and I. That's true. And some of us put it into RRSPs, or some of us put it into savings, et cetera, et cetera. But the vast majority of that money was pumped actually into investors, and it was given to investors. And those investors are rich, they're not poor. And so it's not like they went outside and bought a bicycle or new tires or new mugs or new computers. They already have those things. Instead, what they did is they took that money and they threw it into the stock market to pump, quote unquote, the economy, to prime it. That led to the stocks rising at exorbitant rates. Mm-hmm. And now that people recognize that the savings that the money telegraphed was there actually isn't, well, now the markets are beginning to crash. And so we often get the question is, I'm concerned about my RRSPs and TFSAs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when Alberta becomes independent. And excellent question. But even presently, we should be concerned about them because our dollar is souring to absolutely nothing. Again, mm-hmm. The markets are crashing because of bad, brutal government policy, which has inflated the money supply to such a high degree and has also telegraphed incorrect information to investors and to individuals in Canada, saying there are way more savings available than what there actually are. And so now, of course, they're bringing up interest rates to try and curb this inflation and this monster that they have created. But the reality is the monster, like Frankenstein, is already loose. But to the actual question of RRSPs and TFSAs, when you look at the relationship between countries across the world, specifically, in the democracies and the first world nations, you will see that they have things called tax treaties and other negotiated agreements with each other, so that citizens in either country are as free and able to trade back and forth and to put money here and take money out there as easily as they possibly can. And we see no reason why the situation in Alberta would be any different. So, for example, Canada has what's called a tax treaty with America. And it just means that if a Canadian is living in America, he isn't subject to both countries' tax and, therefore loses absolutely everything he has. Why would it be any different in Alberta? We don't really see a reason why. So while I can't give legal financial advice about what to do about the RRSPs, and TFSAs and so on, et cetera, I can say that with the negotiations that an independent Alberta government would be undertaking with the federal government and all of these pieces of information, it's not as though what's happening will be surprising. It's not like one day you'll say, or will say, my RRSPs are at so-and-so amount, and the next day, poof, they're gone, or the next day they're taxed at this percent. We're trying to make this transition as smooth as possible. The purpose or the idea is not to take the man and push him off of a cliff into the water, like cliff jumpers do. Instead, we want the people of Alberta to go on a slide, basically, and have a nice, smooth transition from what we have in Confederation presently to something new and something better. And the slide down into that new reality is actually quite easy. So that's how I would answer it. And then I would go talk to your financial advisor that you know and trust, see what they'd say or what they do in that situation, and continue to research.
I think Dennis has his hand up. Did you?
Well, I was just going to say that, of course, living in a Canadian living in Alberta as a new nation of Alberta is no different, really, than a Canadian who moves to France. They still deal, as Tanner has just said, with the various tax treaties. So I think the kind of concern that is expressed can be very easily overcome through the negotiations.
So I know we have tons of questions that still want to be asked. And so I think what we're going to do is we're going to try and wrap this part up. Maybe, Alain, can you maybe do one more question? And then after that, we're gonna post stuff up on the Alberta Prosperity Project.com website, and it'll be under the frequently asked questions or the facts. And we'll try and post as many as those as we can in the next couple of days.
Okay, so this question, I'm not sure who should answer that, and I'm not sure who the IDU is. So does the APP have any connection to the IDU, the International Democratic Union? We don't know what that is. No. Okay.
Yeah,
But
So we're not part of the WEF or the WHO or the MOUSE or any other acronym. No, I think we're
Dennis?
Since we haven't heard of the IDU, we're clearly not a part of it.
A good question, though. Someone mentioned about the monarchy and a constitutional monarchy, and a lot of misunderstanding on the difference between allegiance to the Queen and being part of the Commonwealth. And Dennis, you addressed that really well, so did Tanner. But Dennis, can you address that?
Sure. So at present, we function in a parliamentary democracy, and the highest authority is the Crown. Much of that authority through the Constitution has been transferred to the federal government. Now, with respect to the Commonwealth, there are 54 Commonwealth countries, and 34 of them are constitutional republics who have no allegiance, connection, or control by the monarchy whatsoever. So what we would be suggesting to people is that at least in the beginning, when Alberta becomes an independent nation, it becomes de facto an independent nation as a parliamentary democracy. In other words, at that point, we're still affiliated with the Queen. We still have a lieutenant governor, and of course, linked to the monarchy. But it would be as a sovereign nation, it would be a governor general, not a lieutenant governor. So at that point, you have control of all of the things that you want to have control of, but you also have connections with the Commonwealth. You still have trade with the Commonwealth, and there may be some advantages for a period of time to remain a member of the Commonwealth, but as an independent nation. At some point after Alberta becomes an independent sovereign nation, a parliamentary democracy connected to the Crown, the decision can be made by referendum again by the Alberta electorate to move to a constitutional republic, which from the research that we've done provides far more protections, far more independence, far more prosperity than remaining as a parliamentary democracy. So not sure if that's a sufficient answer, but there is an answer, and maybe Leighton might want to add to that.
I don't think I could add too much to it, except that, I mean, as I understand, what we're talking about here is creation of a sovereign and free republic.
Right.
This is a very exciting thing for me, is this idea that, we're able to begin and renovate and really look at, we have the opportunity to take the best things that we know about all the different constitutional systems that have ever existed, even ones that have never been applied in a Western democracy, like David said, and take out, really pick out the best pieces and form something entirely new. To me, that is so, I know I sound like a law geek, because I am, but this is really exciting. It really turns me on. When I work on this stuff, the juices start flowing, and the yellow paper starts flying, and it's very exciting. And I'm really looking forward to working with Dr. Modry and Tanner and Jeff Rath and other people who have great ideas about how to structure this new constitution. We could forge the greatest constitutional document that has ever existed. We have all the tools.
That's right.
The Americans did it, as I said, 246 years ago. We could do even better because we get to stand on the shoulders of those giants. So to me, it's just a very exciting prospect. It isn't fearsome at all. To me, it's just, I'm jazzed. I'm excited about it. And I think all Albertans, can share that optimism. That's the great thing about, if you've been to an APP event, is the optimism.
Yes.
It's not Trudeau bashing. It's not, people crying in their beer. It actually reminds me a lot of going to church. I was raised in the church, and that optimism of being in church, and that feeling of fellowship, and the optimism of the APP, which I hope is coming through in this podcast. It's difficult to achieve that, on a Zoom call, but I really would urge anybody who has not yet done it to get out to an APP meeting, because to experience it is something absolutely unique. And it's exactly what Albertans need right now. We need some joy, we need some fellowship, we need some optimism, we need hope. And I just think it's, if you go and you experience it, I think you'll leave there having a different perspective on these things.
Just let me clarify one point. When I do favor absolutely a constitutional republic for all the reasons Leighton just said, but when we first become independent, we've declared our independence from Canada, we are still involved in the Commonwealth as a parliamentary democracy. And from there, we transition to a constitutional republic with all of the benefits that accrue.
Well,
Can I
thank
just,
you.
interject something real quick? So if you're watching this at home, and what you've heard and seen on this webinar has given you some hope, and you're excited, hopefully you're as excited as Leighton. I would encourage you to you got to tell your friends. You got to tell your family members, like, get this information out there. And a really great way to do this is to make sure that you have something in your home on a shelf that you can look at every day and remind you that there is hope and we do have a path forward and the path is clear. And what better thing to put on your shelf and have your friends and neighbors ask you about than that bear that is right beside Dr. Modry.
There he is, APP bear.
And so that there's two reasons why you should have something like that in your home, whether it's a hat or a shirt to the bear. The first reason is because that bear, seeing that APP symbol, will give people hope. And if they don't have hope when they first see it, when you tell them what it's all about, it will give them hope. The second thing is, all of that merchandise that you buy, like whether it's from a restaurant like mine or from the Alberta Prosperity Project or from one of the political parties, the money that's made from that allows these groups to continue getting this message out more. And so by doing something as simple as buying a cute little teddy bear and sticking it on your shelf, you are actually helping to get this message into more Albertans' homes. And I would encourage and challenge you to do that.
Yeah.
Speaking of
APP.
challenges, we should have a challenge among our members to name the bear.
Well, that's a good idea.
How about Little App?
Yeah, there you go.
Little laugh. Entrepreneur.
Sounds
All right.
like he's going to start rapping.
I was just going to say that
The
this,
new app in town, the new app in town.
this past weekend, APP was actually in a parade in Innisfail. And it was amazing watching that float go down and having people talk to APP members. And of course, it's a parade, so throwing candy out. But we're also going to be doing that same thing in Ponoka. I believe it's on the 30th. And so that'll also be up on the events that if there's anything that's going to be involved in a parade or anything APP-ish, will definitely be on the website. So I'd like to thank the panel for you guys are amazing. We do have one more speaker, believe it or not. Yes, and we'll try and wrap this up. And my introduction is probably going to be longer than her actual speech. So let me just get right into that. This is Shannon Peckham, and she basically said, there's really nothing special about me, what I can say about myself. And that was kind of her introduction. And I thought, no, that I beg to differ. She's been a teacher since 1995, and she's had many different roles as an educator, from teaching kindergarten to training hockey teams in the Alberta Junior Hockey League. She has not been inside a classroom or even a school since February 2020. She knew that she would never take part in the abuses that the children are going through to have to endure. It was then that she discovered that if you are not going to stand up for what is right, then you also have to understand that you are part of what is wrong. She says that she has a certain amount of guilt about that, to be honest, and no respect for those who allowed it to happen at all. She looks forward to the day when the entire educational system is restructured from the ground up with the model that the Alberta Prosperity Project has outlined. She truly believes that if you want to see change, you have to be the change. She says she is just trying to be the change she wants to see in this world. If she can give one person the courage to stand up for themselves and what they believe in, then she feels like she is doing okay. She says she's not a doctor or a lawyer or an economist. She's just one person with a voice trying to make a difference. And she is also the educational coordinator for the Alberta Prosperity Project. So I'd like to say hello and thank you for all that she has done. And this is Shannon Peckham.
We are so very blessed that you joined us this evening. So thank you. One of my favorite quotes is from Thomas Jefferson. Whenever you do a thing, do it as if the entire world is watching. The entire world is watching Alberta right now. They're watching all of us. The Alberta Prosperity Project has been sweeping across this province, planting the seeds of hope and the seeds of change. In a few short months, we have grown to close to 6,500 members. Thousands of people have heard our message. Our governments have done their very best to divide us. Our hope is that after listening to our presentations, you realize that you're not alone. United together, we can do so much. There is strength in numbers. We are building a community within ourselves, and we want all of you to join. We have one chance to secure a future for our children and our grandchildren. We have one chance to gain our freedom and our prosperity, and that is by electing an independent-minded government in 2023. We need people with vision. We need people with energy. We need people with ideas. Our legacies depend on that. Our children and our grandchildren need us to fight. They need us to pick up this torch and crest the hill of independence with it. We have good people at our table, but we need more. So please buy that membership. They start at $20. Become a chapter leader, become a volunteer, create events in your community that will bring people together. We've got a youth event in Red Deer tomorrow. It starts at 7 p.m. at Kin Canyon Park. Bring a friend, bring a chair, bring your appetite for s'mores. We'll be in Mirror on Saturday. Our presentations for solutions for a new Alberta start at 4 o'clock. We have events every Thursday throughout July. Check the events tab on the website for the dates and locations. Our chapter leaders are bridging the gaps in their communities with parade floats, picnics, and prosperity gardens. Find a chapter near you and get involved. There is power in communities that have discovered what they care for. There is a great sense of purpose in growing fellowship, building community, and uniting together for a common cause. We need you to take this message back to your friends and your neighbors and to show them that there is hope. We need you to be the change you want to see in the world. Talk to your friends and neighbors. If you have questions, direct them to our contact email or call the toll-free number. Encourage people to come to an Alberta Prosperity Project event and listen to our presentations for themselves. Turn that "you're never going to do this" into "this is 100% doable." We have a vision for Alberta. Our solution, with no politicians at our table, is to unite 500,000 to 1 million to 1.5 million or more Albertans to stand together. That's something that has never been done before. We're making history right now. I encourage you to stand with us and be a part of that history. I challenge you to be part of that history. Join us. We must restore our communities, owing our ultimate allegiance never again to any government, but to our fellow man. Alberta will become a sovereign, constitutional republic, one where the First Nations people sit at the table in the creation of this new nation of Alberta. And on that great day, Alberta truly will become united, strong, and free. Thanks for joining us. See you down the road.
Thank you so much, very much there, Shannon. That was amazing. And again, we're just going to wrap things up. So I'd like to thank all the speakers and to everyone helping behind. Oh, am I muted? Am I muted? No, I'm not. Okay. Again, thank you to all the speakers and to everyone helping behind the webinar and the APP. And of course, thank you for everyone for staying online. It did go about another 45 minutes longer than we thought. And for watching and listening and commenting and asking questions. This is the first of many webinars that we hope to have, and we will have new speakers and new information as we go along. We're always looking for help and volunteers. If you have time and experience and a skill set that you think can help us, please do not hesitate to contact us through the albertaprosperityproject.com website. And I want to wrap up this webinar by putting into perspective how much Canada has changed in 62 years. So I'm going to read the I Am Canadian speech from John Diefenbaker on July 1st, 1960, from the Canadian Bill of Rights, in which he says, "I am a Canadian, a free to speak without fear, free to worship God in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind." I wish you a fabulous rest of your evening. We hope to see you at an event in person or online again very soon. Take care, God bless, and good night from the Alberta Prosperity Project. Thank you.
Record.